Emmett Darrow was 41 years old the evening he came home from a regional buyers conference in Greensboro and found every suit he owned hanging in the backyard in the rain. He stood at the edge of the driveway for a long moment, still holding his overnight bag, taking in what he was seeing. 7 suits, hanging from the clothesline his wife had strung between the oak tree and the fence post at the back of the yard, each one soaked through and ruined. The fabric mottled pale, the structure gone, the kind of damage that could only be explained one way. He could smell it from 15 feet. Bleach, deliberate and thorough, applied not in a fit of rage, but with the particular methodical quality of someone who had decided this was the correct action and had taken her time with it. He set his bag on the driveway. He walked to the clothesline and stood before the ruined suits the way he stood before any damaged thing, with attention, without panic, reading the evidence. He was a dry cleaner by visible trade. That was what his neighbors knew him as, what his wife told people at dinner parties in Cincinnati, that her husband ran a dry cleaning shop on the East Side. The kind of modest establishment where working people brought their dress clothes on Fridays and picked them up on Saturdays. He drove a hatchback. He smelled faintly of chemical solvent at the end of long days. Tanya's colleagues at the hospital referred to him as reliable, in the particular tone that made reliability sound like the ceiling rather than the floor. What Tanya did not know, what she had never asked about in 7 years of marriage, was the warehouse. The fabric, the $380,000 in wholesale textile inventory, and the custom suiting operation that had been quietly running through a separate business entity for the better part of a decade. She had just poured bleach on suits belonging to a man who could clothe himself from floor to ceiling. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came into the shop in the particular way it came into the east side of Cincinnati in early November, low and flat, cutting through the plate glass of the front window and landing across the pressing board and the steam equipment and the long rack of finished garments waiting for their owners. Emmett had opened at 7. The way he opened every day, because the habit of early hours was something his grandmother had instilled in him before he was old enough to understand why, and something he had continued long past needing the reason explained. He was pressing a dinner jacket when the day began in earnest, a careful operation, steam and pressure applied in the right sequence to restore the roll of a lapel that had been flattened by improper storage. A lapel had to be coaxed back to its correct position, not forced. The structure was in the canvas underneath, the interfacing that gave the chest its shape, the pad stitching that held the roll. You could not see any of this from the outside. You could only see the result of it, which was either right or wrong, and if you knew what you were looking at, you knew the difference immediately. He had learned this from his grandfather, Hector Darrow, who had been a tailor in Louisville for 40 years, and who had passed the language of cloth to Emmett, the way some grandfathers passed a fishing rod or a socket set, as a matter of course, as a natural part of what it meant to be a Darrow man. Hector had told him once, when Emmett was 11 and impatient with the slowness of a hand-basting task, "Boy, the quality of a suit is never in what you see. It is always in what you don't see. What's underneath? The bones. If the bones are right, the rest follows." He had died at 83, the year Emmett turned 30, and there was not a garment that passed through his hands that did not carry that instruction somewhere in it. He had met Tanya Beaumont 5 years into his time in Cincinnati at a Chamber of Commerce mixer on a Thursday evening in March, where she had been attending on behalf of the hospital's community relations department, and he had been attending on behalf of nothing in particular, except the quiet usefulness of being present in rooms where people talked about business. She was warm and socially agile, and she had a quality he had found genuinely attractive. She asked follow-up questions, which was rarer than people acknowledged. He had told her about the dry cleaning shop, and she had asked 2 questions about the business that showed she had heard his answer. He had proposed 2 years later in the shop itself, after hours, surrounded by the smell of pressed linen and the soft hiss of steam, and she had laughed at the setting and then said yes. He had believed she meant it. The changes had arrived quietly, a coolness at dinner that he attributed, month after month, to the particular pressures of her work at the hospital, which was genuinely demanding and genuinely stressful, and which he gave every benefit of every doubt. A habit of spending evenings on her phone in the second bedroom she used as a home office, with the door closed in a way that had not always been the case. New jewelry he had not given her, appearing gradually and without mention, each piece small enough that remarking on it might seem suspicious rather than observant. He had remarked on none of it. He had noted all of it. In the breast pocket of his work apron, a second phone, registered to the wholesale textile operation, the one his business partner and his buyers and his suppliers used to reach him, sat where it always sat, unknown to Tanya in the way that a great many things about Emmett Darrow were unknown to the people who believed they had a complete picture of him. That phone had 43 contacts. Not one of them was Tanya's name. He finished pressing the dinner jacket. He hung it on the rack with the others. That afternoon, when he returned home from a delivery and came through the side entrance to the kitchen, Tanya was on a call in the second bedroom, with the door pulled, almost closed. He heard a man's voice through the gap, low and easy, the voice of someone comfortable in the conversation. He did not push the door. He did not announce himself. He went to the kitchen and poured water and stood at the counter and listened to nothing in particular, because he did not need to hear specifics to understand the structure of what he was hearing. He knew the bones. He drove to Greensboro the next morning for the conference. He came home to the clothesline. He stood in the backyard for a long time after he understood what he was looking at. He took his phone from his pocket and photographed each suit, methodically, front and back, detail shots of the bleach patterning on each piece, the systematic thoroughness of the damage that confirmed this had not been accident or impulse. He forwarded every image to his own email. He noted the time and date in a document he opened on the phone and labeled with the date. His hands didn't shake. He went inside. Tanya was not home. He did not look for her. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop and pulled up the joint account, their shared household account, the one they both drew from for the mortgage and utilities and groceries. He had not reviewed it with any particular focus in recent months. He reviewed it now. What he found across the previous 14 months was a pattern he recognized in the way you recognize the structure of a garment once you've seen enough of them. Not in any single line, but in the whole of it. The shape of it. The deliberateness with which it had been cut. 26 transfers, ranging from $400 to $2,200, all made on Tuesday mornings, all routed to an account he did not recognize. He added the figures carefully. Total across 14 months, $31,600. He went back further. There were 6 additional transfers in the 4 months before that, smaller, coded in the account description as household services. They were not household services. They brought the total to $38,200. He sat with that number for a long time. He thought about the voice through the door. He thought about the jewelry. He thought about the suits on the clothesline and what it meant to destroy something that belonging to someone with such deliberateness, not in anger, he understood now, but as a statement, as a message about what she believed he had and what she believed she could take from him. She had no idea what he had. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it The Full Picture. He picked up the secondary phone and called the one person who understood the entire scope of what Emmett Darrow had built over the preceding decade, and he told her it was time. He met with his attorney, Dorothea Finch, on a Wednesday morning in her office in downtown Cincinnati. Dorothea was 56 years old, a business and family law attorney who had represented both the dry cleaning operation and the wholesale textile company for 8 years, and who had the settled competence of someone who had seen every variety of marital and business dispute and had long ago stopped being surprised by the ingenuity with which people misunderstood their own situations. She reviewed the account documentation he had assembled. She reviewed the photographs of the suits. She reviewed the timeline he had constructed, noting each Tuesday transfer against his own confirmed schedule. She looked up at him over her reading glasses when she finished. "The Bleach," she said. 7 suits, he said. "All documented. That is destruction of personal property." She set the papers down. "It is also, and this is the part that interests me professionally, a demonstration of intent that will be useful in the dissolution proceedings when it comes to questions of conduct." She folded her hands. "Tell me about the textile operation," he told her. The wholesale company had been incorporated 11 years ago, 2 years before he opened the dry cleaning shop, and 4 years before he met Tanya. It operated from a warehouse on the east side of the city, 12,000 square feet of climate-controlled space, carrying custom suiting fabric, finished garments at various stages of completion, and a developing wholesale line that supplied 4 independent men's clothiers in the region. Current inventory value, as certified by his accountant in the prior quarter, $380,000. The business itself, including the client contracts and the developing wholesale accounts, was valued by his accountant at just over $1.2 million. Dorothea did not flinch at any of this. She had known most of it already. "She doesn't know about the warehouse," she said. "She has never been to the warehouse," Emmett said. "She knows I have suppliers. She believes they supply the dry cleaning operation. And the prenuptial agreement covers the textile company in full. Signed and filed before we were married. The agreement specifies all pre-marital business interests and their derivative growth." Dorothea picked up her pen. "The $38,200 in transfers, I want a forensic accountant on those by end of week. I want to know the destination account and what it was used for." "I believe I already know," Emmett said. "So do I," she said. "But we want the documentation." She looked at him one more time with the particular expression she used when she had absorbed everything relevant and was moving from listening to action. "The suits," she said. "Are they salvageable?" "No," he said. She nodded once. "Then we document the replacement value too." Preparation was the work. And the work, in his experience, always told you the truth about the person doing it. He drove to Louisville on a Thursday to see his mother's older brother, Uncle Prosper, who was 74 and had worked alongside Emmett's grandfather Hector in the tailor's shop for 20 years before age and arthritis had forced him to retirement. Prosper lived in a narrow brick house in the Smoketown neighborhood where he had lived for 40 years, and he answered the door the way he always answered it, already knowing who was on the other side, already with something warm waiting on the stove. They sat in the front room among the things Prosper had held on to from the shop. A dress form in the corner, 2 bolts of fabric propped against the wall that he'd had for 30 years and could not bring himself to use or discard. A framed photograph of Hector measuring a customer that Emmett had known since childhood. Prosper listened to everything. He was a man who had spent 50 years listening to the language of cloth and the language of people, and he understood both with the same patience. When Emmett finished, the old man looked at the photograph of Hector for a long moment. She poured bleach on your suits, Prosper said. Yes, and she doesn't know about the warehouse. No, Prosper was quiet for a while. He turned the coffee cup slowly in his thick, careful hands. Your grandfather used to say, he began, that a man who could read cloth could read people. That the same qualities that made a fabric cheap, the loose weave, the short fibers, the finish that looked good in the store and fell apart after the first season, were the same qualities that made a person unreliable. He set the cup down. He said you could always tell the difference if you looked at the structure, not the surface. The structure. Emmett nodded. She looked at the surface, Prosper said. She saw a dry cleaner. She saw suits she could ruin. He paused. She never looked at the structure. Emmett drove back to Cincinnati that evening along the highway that ran north through the river country, the landscape flattening in the dark on either side of the road, and he thought about surface and structure and the difference between what a thing looked like and what it actually was. And by the time he reached the city lights, he had settled into the particular clarity of a man who had examined the full fabric of a situation and understood exactly what he was dealing with. By the following Friday, Dorothea's forensic accountant had confirmed what Emmett had suspected. The $38,200 had gone to a personal account belonging to a man named Vincent Hale, a pharmaceutical sales representative whose name appeared 21 times in Tanya's phone records over the preceding 15 months, on dates that aligned precisely with Emmett's confirmed travel days to Greensboro and Columbus and Louisville. The transfers had been structured, as Emmett had recognized from the pattern, to stay beneath the threshold of automated joint account alerts. 15 months of deliberate, structured withdrawal. The suits had been a statement. The money had been the real preparation. She had been building her exit for over a year, and she had believed she knew exactly what she was leaving behind. That Thursday evening, Emmett came home to a house that was quiet, in the careful way it had been quiet for months. A managed quiet, maintained by two people who were each carrying something they had decided not to say. Tanya was in the kitchen when he came through the door, making dinner with her back to him in the way she had made dinner for the past 6 months. And he said good evening, and she said good evening, and he set his bag down and washed his hands at the sink, and they moved around each other in the practiced choreography of a household in which the real conversation was happening somewhere else entirely. He ate what she made. He thanked her for it. He asked about her week and listened to her answer and said the right things in the right places. She had no idea that Dorothea had spent the afternoon preparing a dissolution filing. She had no idea that a forensic accountant had spent 2 days tracing 26 transfers through a paper trail that led directly to Vincent Hale's personal account. She believed she was still the one who knew the shape of what was coming. He helped clear the table. He said good night. He went to the spare room he used as a home office and closed the door and sat in the dark for a long moment, not out of grief, but out of the particular stillness of a man who has seen the full fabric of a situation and is waiting, with complete patience, for the right moment to lay it flat. Real power operated in quiet rooms and in warehouses with the lights off. The reckoning happened in a conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown Cincinnati office building on a Tuesday morning in January. Arranged through the attorneys after Tanya's counsel had received Dorothea's initial dissolution filing and the accompanying documentation, the account transfer analysis, the photographs of the bleached suits with their certified replacement values, and the preliminary asset disclosure that had, by all accounts, caused a significant revision in the strategy Tanya's attorney had initially prepared. Tanya arrived with her attorney, a man named Godwin, who had taken the case with the confidence that tended to accompany cases where one party believed the other had little to fight with. That confidence had revised itself considerably over the preceding week. He sat beside Tanya with the measured expression of a man who had read the full asset disclosure and was now focused on managing expectations rather than advancing a position. Tanya herself wore the composure she brought to difficult situations. Controlled, upright. The composure of a woman who had prepared herself for a confrontation she believed she understood. She looked at Emmett when she entered the room with the steady assessment of someone who had decided on their terms before sitting down. Dorothea placed the first document on the table. It was the textile company's incorporation filing, 11 years old, predating the marriage by 4 years, with Emmett's name as sole founder and member. Tanya's expression did not change. The second document was the warehouse lease and the current inventory certification, $380,000 in documented textile assets, along with the business valuation summary at $1.2 million. Dorothea placed it in the center of the table without commentary, because it required none. Tanya looked at the inventory figure. Something moved behind her eyes, a recalibration she could not fully conceal. The third document was the forensic account analysis. 26 transfers, 14 months, $38,200. Destination account, Vincent Hale. Tanya's attorney placed a hand briefly on her arm, the professional signal. She looked at Emmett for the first time since sitting down. The fourth document was the photograph file. 7 suits on a clothesline in November rain, each one documented front and back, with a certified replacement value on the final page. Emmett had worn those suits to client meetings and industry events and dinners that had meant something to him, and he had documented every one of them because he was a man who kept records of things that mattered, and the documentation now sat on a conference table telling the story of what she had done with complete precision. Tanya's composure had held through 3 documents. It did not hold through the fourth. "I didn't know," she said, quietly, and not entirely to anyone in particular. "About the warehouse," Emmett said, with the same evenness he said everything. "It was not a question." "I know you didn't." He looked at her steadily. "You knew about the suits." She did not answer that. "The prenuptial agreement covers the textile company in full," he continued. "The business, the inventory, the warehouse, and all derivative interests. Your attorney has the certified copy. What falls within the marital estate is the joint account balance, less the documented withdrawals, and the equity in the house." He paused. "The suits will be addressed as destruction of personal property. The account transfers will be addressed as conversion of marital funds." He paused once more, then said what he had come to say, not as a weapon, but as a simple, accurate statement of what was true. "You planned this for over a year. You prepared very carefully. You just didn't look at the full picture before you started." Tanya's attorney began outlining a settlement framework. Dorothea listened and responded. The negotiation that followed took 90 minutes and arrived at terms that reflected the full documentation in front of both parties. Emmett signed the final agreed points. He gathered his copies. He stood. He looked at Tanya one last time, at the woman he had built a life alongside, or had believed he was building it alongside, for 7 years, and what he felt was not triumph, and not bitterness. It was the clean, quiet finality that came from having laid the full truth of a thing on a table in broad daylight and let it be what it was. "I hope you land somewhere good," he said. He walked out of the room. The door closed behind him. He rode the elevator down 14 floors and walked out into the January cold and stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets and let the air settle around him. He was finished. 11 months had passed like a long winter thaw by the time Emmett stood in the warehouse on a Saturday morning, running his hand along a bolt of charcoal gray wool suiting fabric that had arrived from a mill in England the previous week. A medium-weight flannel with a tight weave and a hand that felt exactly right. The kind of cloth that rewarded patience and precision and did not forgive. Carelessness. The dissolution had been finalized in May. The prenuptial agreement had protected the textile company completely. The $38,200 in transferred funds had been recovered through the marital estate division and credited against the joint account settlement. Tanya had received the equity in the house, her personal savings, and a portion of the joint account balance. She had received what the agreement and the law provided. It was not nothing. It was also not what she had understood herself to be reaching for. Vincent Hale had ended the relationship 6 weeks after the dissolution was finalized. Tanya was working at a different hospital now, a transfer she had arranged quietly before the proceedings concluded, which Emmett understood as a form of self-preservation and did not hold against her. Her former social circle in Cincinnati had narrowed considerably in the preceding months, in the ordinary way that social circles narrowed when the story that had held them together changed shape. Emmett had heard all of this from a mutual acquaintance who reported it without malice and whom Emmett had thanked and not pressed for further detail. He had met Simone at a textile sourcing fair in Columbus in the spring, where she had been representing a small domestic fabric mill that Emmett had been curious about for 2 years and had not yet visited. She was a materials specialist with the precise intelligence of someone who understood both the technical and the aesthetic dimensions of cloth, who talked about fiber content and thread count with the same fluency she brought to talking about how a room felt when the right fabric was in it. She had come to the warehouse twice since, to look at what he had built, and both times she had walked the space with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding something, rather than performing interest in it. She was coming again today, in an hour, and he had set aside 3 bolts he wanted to show her. He ran his hand along the English flannel one more time. The quality was in the weave. In the structure you could feel but not quite see, in the honesty of the material, which did not claim to be anything other than what it was. His grandfather had been right about cloth. He had been right about most things. He had built everything worth keeping, and it had all been here, waiting, the whole time. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe, so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.